Good evening, and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott, and tonight, once again, we'll be going back in history. Our guest tonight is Richard Russo. He's a World War II reenactor. Richard, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
And the first thing I should point out is that you are dressed in the uniform of the German Army.
That is correct.
So you reenact World War II battles, but from the German perspective.
That's absolutely correct. What I portray is what we call it. I am what I consider a military living historian, okay? I'm a member of two different organizations. One, which I am the unit commander of, which is the commander of the 5th Company of the Gross Deutschland Division, which was a historical German division.
And would that make you a captain, for example?
No, I am actually a Feldwebel, okay?
What's the equivalent in
That's equivalent to a sergeant in the American Army, and the term Feldwebel actually means field mother in German. So that gives you an indication of what their role was.
Yeah, keeping them all kind of lined up and moving in the same direction.
Exactly, and you can tell my rank by this silver Litzen on my collar and on my shoulder tabs here. The unit that I portray, the Gross Deutschland unit, was considered one of the elite divisions in the German Army. And how you could determine an elite division is they had cuff titles on their uniforms. This cuff title says Gross Deutschland in Old Germanic script. Gross Deutschland's literal translation is Greater Germany. To have been a member of this unit, you had to have been born in one of the original 16 provinces of Germany. It was the only division within the German army that was raised from men throughout the entire country. Historically, this division fought the entire war on the Eastern Front against the Russians, with an exception of a small time in France in 1940. The group of guys that I'm with chose to pick this particular unit to portray because they never fought against Americans historically during the war.
Now, when you reenact, though, do you reenact then against the Russians?
We reenact against the reenactors. They portray Russian, British, American, all the various elements, that were involved in World War II. So, we can come up against guys that are portraying Polish paratroopers or American paratroopers or American tankers. There's people who have everything under the sun in this hobby: aircraft, tanks, motorcycles, jeeps. Everything.
Now, in reenacting, though, I mean, and you referred to yourself as a living historian.
Correct.
If your unit historically only fought on the Russian front, then what are you accomplishing? If you, say, are in a reenactment and it's a group of American tank division, for example,
right.
That wouldn't have happened historically because your division would never have been there.
Correct.
So how does that work in the reenactment?
Oh, well, in the reenacting world, just because of the number of participants involved, there's about 1,100 World War II reenactors in the country, unlike Civil War reenacting, which I started out doing that before I got involved into this element of the hobby. There's probably about 150,000. Okay, so it's a relatively smaller group. So we tend to fight more generic type battles versus a specific battle.
Sure. I mean, it's limited by the numbers and how many
correct.
participants can you get for a given reenactment.
Right.
So what is actually, if you think in broad terms, what is the purpose of the reenactment, and who observes it besides the people who do it? Are there observers who are going to see what's going on?
Sure. I mean, we do this for the public, and what we try to do is accomplish 3 goals. Is one, to educate the public regarding the arms, the equipment, the mentality of the time, the geopolitical aspects of what was happening during the 40s. 2 is to honor the veterans of all the countries that fought in the war. And 3 is actually to preserve history by either restoring vehicles or acquiring these items and the uniforms and make sure that they're just not lost to history. So that's what we try to accomplish.
Now, that uniform you're wearing, for example, though, that's a reproduction, right?
This particular uniform is a reproduction, okay? And the reason that I would not be wearing an original uniform is because one is they're too expensive, specifically on the German side. They become such highly prized collector's items that you wouldn't want to run around and tear them up out in the field. But the particular uniform I am wearing was actually made by a firm that was called Janka. They actually made the original uniforms for the Germans during the war. And interestingly enough, the Germans did focus groups that designed their uniform with women prior to the beginning of World War II, because they wanted uniforms that looked a little bit more snappy and sexy, okay, than the average utilitarian uniforms that a lot of the other Allied,
So there was an element of fashion involved.
Yes,
in
it was.
designed.
Yeah, and being the German mentality, they thought about every little aspect of things.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the company that made that, though, I assume then that was the original pattern or something very
Right.
close to that.
This uniform that I'm wearing is what the German Army wore when they marched into Poland during 1939. It had slate gray pants, it had the field gray tunic, the green collars, okay, the jack boots. As the war went on, things started to change just due to the fact that the bombing campaign of the Allies started to affect their abilities to produce things. So they started to simplify the uniforms. They got rid of the pleating on the pockets that you can see here. They stopped dyeing the pants a different color. They eliminated the green collar to simplify it. And they even went to lower boots because to save on shoe
Less
leather.
material,
On
right.
material, yeah. Now the reason I got into this hobby is because of this helmet right here. Is I had 5 uncles that fought on the Allied side in World War II, and one of them picked this helmet off a beach in Normandy and brought it home, and somehow it ended up in my hand. So I've been running around playing Army since the age of about 5 years old with this helmet.
That's an original
So this
German
is an original
helmet.
German helmet.
Wow,
okay?
picked up from the beach in Normandy.
Correct.
Did it look about like the way it does now?
No, it was in more pristine condition when I first got it, unfortunately.
But playing with it as a
I
kid.
didn't realize
yeah.
that I was losing some of its value by playing with it, but such is life.
That's okay. I have a pair of Air Jordan sneakers from the original 1985 ones, which if I'd only known at the time, of course I bought them to wear them. If I'd never worn them,
Yes.
they'd be worth a whole lot of money
yes,
today.
exactly.
Now they're not
Exactly.
because they're beat up.
Yep.
So I appreciate the fact that this has had some use since it was first picked up. So this is what got you interested. Now, at what point in your life did you make the transition from thinking, well, this is just something cool I have, into thinking, oh, this would be something to pursue?
Well, it actually happened to me is I started my, this got me interested in military history, and of course I did a lot of reading on books, specifically with World War II, but I actually started off doing Civil War reenacting, doing the good guy, the Union.
Well, that's good guy from our perspective.
From our perspective,
Other
not from
states
the
that might see
Southern.
that other way.
Correct.
Right.
And I was at a Civil War reenactment that was more of a timeline where they had Revolutionary War reenactors, Civil War reenactors, and then they had World War II reenactors. And when I saw them, I gave up doing Civil War and I started focusing on doing World War II.
What was it that was more interesting to you about World War II?
Well, it's because it was a modern day army. You could still speak to the veterans, okay? And
learn from
them. You know, you had a lot more photographic evidence, so you could see the equipment. The equipment was readily available to collect. You know, so it was that got me more interested in.
So speaking of the equipment, let's talk a little bit about some of the gear you have here. So what are we looking at? We've talked about the helmet. What is this over here?
All right, now this gear that I have on the table is what a standard infantryman would be carrying. So right here you have their mess kit.
So for eating, right?
Correct. The German Army worked a little bit differently. The American Army had prepackaged, they call them C rations. The German Army provided their soldiers hot meals in the field. So they had central cooking stations just behind the front lines, and they would have men with large backpack canisters that would bring the hot food right out to the men in the front line of the trenches or wherever they were. And so they would use this as their mess kin to hold the material.
Sounds very difficult and logistically dangerous to
Yeah,
do
it
that.
probably was. It probably was much more. They did have some of the prepackaged food, and they would keep one of those in here. They were called iron rations, and there's a little pouch on the back of this right here. You can see it.
And what is this
And
fabric here? What is this?
This is what's called a Zeltbahn. It's a 1/4 of a triangular tent. So each soldier would carry one piece of the Zeltbahn, 2 tent stakes, 2 tent pins, and 1 tent pole. So 4 men would come together to make a tent.
Okay.
Okay, 2 men would be out on the line, the other 2 would be sleeping. And so that's how they approached it. And these Zeltbahns could also be used as rain ponchos, and you could see they were camouflaged in color.
Sure, and they're small enough. I mean, you could carry this, whereas
Yes.
carrying 4 of these would be prohibitive. Right?
And so they were buttoned together, and what was interesting about them, you could button larger numbers into different shapes, so you could make an 8-man tent, or a 12-man tent, or 16 men. It was just based on the number of pieces you had to assemble.
Sounds very German, very
Yes,
efficient.
yes, it
Yeah,
was.
yeah.
Yes, typical in their thinking.
And so what else? We have a number of things up
Okay.
here as well.
Well, what we have here is their canteen. This is called a bread bag, where they would keep personal items or pieces of food. They have their cartridge boxes, which are the black. Each one of those cartridge boxes would carry 10 rounds for this K98, is what this is, rifle. It's a 5-shot bolt-action rifle. They would load, again, 5 cartridges would be loaded into this. It was a very slow-firing weapon.
Single shot.
Single shot. There was a reason for that, and I'll get into that after I discuss the rest of this. Since I would be a sergeant, I would also have a sidearm, which was a pistol. The other men would have a bayonet. This is
But now the standard infantry soldier would not also have that sidearm.
No. Just because of my rank, I would have the pistol.
And
they
what
would have had a bayonet.
What would be the advantage of having the pistol as well as the rifle? Why would the
For
officers
close-in fighting, and it just gave you some additional firepower.
Okay.
Yep.
I mean, I'm just surprised that they wouldn't want to. I mean, maybe it was an expense thing, but why they wouldn't have wanted all of the soldiers to be equipped with that. If it's useful, then theoretically every soldier could have made use of it.
And of course, the cost involved.
Right.
And this is the iconic German Luger. Okay, it's a 9
seen
millimeter.
that before. Right?
Yep. Interesting enough, you may want to text it. You could see it. It's very easy to point. A very ergonomically designed weapon. It kind of becomes just an extension of your hand.
Now I'm no expert on firearms.
Yeah.
I will tell you, but it does feel very well balanced.
Balanced.
Yeah, as though it's not hard to move around.
Right.
And I imagine it was fairly easy to aim.
So that would have a 10-shot clip.
Now, these are not loaded.
No,
I should have asked you that
no,
before.
no,
Nothing here is
no,
dangerous,
no,
right?
no,
We're not going to have any
Yeah,
accidents on
yeah,
the set. Just
yeah.
double checking. Yeah, I can see where that would, and it fits the hand very well.
Very well,
It feels very firm.
Right. They had different types of firearms that they used. The large canister here, which you see a lot in the movies, is actually a gas mask canister. Okay, now you may ask, well, why were they carrying gas mask canisters when poison gas was not used during World War II?
Well, but there was no guarantee it wouldn't be used.
Well, that was one of the things, but the other thing is that Hitler was a casualty of a gas attack during World War I, so he made them wear their gas masks throughout the war. So you would think that you could just open this up and throw away the gas mask and put your cigarettes or your dry pair of socks in there. If you got caught doing that in the German army, there were very severe repercussions.
Wow. So, yes, it was his personal experience that gas attacks were very dangerous.
Right. And he micromanaged the war.
To the detriment of the German army, as I have read.
Yep.
He wasn't, it turns out, a very good military commander.
He wasn't. He was lucky in the beginning, and then it kind of set the tone and made him think he was invincible. This is what's called a German stick grenade. The Americans had a nickname for this. They called it a potato masher because in early American history, they made wood dowels like this to actually mash potatoes. Okay, the reason it has this long stick on it is because it gives you more leverage to throw the hand grenade. Okay, the way the German army even fought the war was very different than the American army. This is a offensive weapon. Okay, this is equivalent to today's flashbang. It's a concussion grenade. Okay, the purpose of this weapon is you would throw it at the enemy, it would explode and not kill them with shrapnel, it would stun them, okay,
so
and allow you to be running forward and take the position without the fear of being hit by your own shrapnel. So their mentality on fighting the war was to attack, attack, attack. They were constantly on the attack, even when they were in a defensive situation.
Well, that was the concept behind the Blitzkrieg, right? It was
That's
fast
correct.
and furious attack.
Exactly.
Right?
And it was a little bit more than that. Blitzkrieg does mean lightning war, okay? But they were the first army to integrate all the elements of the armed forces, aircraft, tanks, artillery, and infantry, all at one location. So that what they would do is concentrate those forces, and they were all in radio communication, which by today's standards, we'd say, why weren't all armies? It just wasn't.
Well, it just wasn't done.
Done at that time. So they were the first ones to realize the advantage of doing that. So they would attack a opponent in a specific location, then break through and then fan out and encircle them, and it was very effective. They went through Poland, okay, in 6 weeks, in France in like 14 weeks. And at the time, it's hard for us to understand that from today's perspective. And but at that point in time, France and Poland were the number 3 and number 4 world military powers. And here, the Germans took them on in less than 3 months and took them over. Yeah.
There's an adage, I'm sure you've heard, that generals always prepare to fight the last war.
That's correct.
And so here the Germans actually had discovered a new strategy that their opponents simply weren't prepared for.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I suppose coming out of the World War I, where it was slogging out trench warfare, where you would gain ground, I mean, a victory would be that you gained 100 yards. And here the Germans came around and would take 100 miles.
Yes, absolutely. And they were so far ahead of our time. Again, us being Americans, we look at things from the 2016 perspective. Back in the 1940s, we were like the 8th military power in the world. The number 1 military power in the world was Germany at the time, followed by Japan, Great Britain, France, Poland, Russia, Italy, then the United States. The United States didn't become a world military power until after World War II.
Well, yes, as I understand, in fact, the U.S. really didn't have much of a standing army going into World War II.
That's correct.
The army would be raised for a particular war and then would be disbanded after the war. It wasn't until after World War II that the United States realized that they would keep a standing army for forever.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Now, what we try to do with all this equipment is kind of go into a little bit of a time machine per se. So when I go out and reenact on a weekend, and during a reenactment, I don't use the name Rich Russo, I become Ernst Jums. Okay, and Ernst Jums was an actual German soldier. He was killed in Finland in 1943. He happened to be the grandfather of one of the secretaries that worked for me. Okay,
but he was not this sergeant in this particular uniform.
No, he was in a different. I just to honor her, I took the name. Honor him, I took the name. And so what we try to do is, for the weekend, portray the German soldier as accurately as we can through the equipment. We do all our commands in German. Okay, all our tactics are in German.
So you've had to learn to speak German.
Yeah, to some degree. Yeah, you know, I can move my troops on the field using German commands. So we eat the food they do. We sleep in the foxhole. We try to immerse ourselves in that time period, as does all the other reenactors that are portraying the Americans or other forces involved.
And other than what is often described as the hell of war, what do you discover by immersing yourself that deeply? What is it you discover about the men who fought like this?
It's interesting that you asked that question. You get to the feeling of what they went through, okay, some of the hardships, and that kind of creates camaraderie. And you learn that necessity is the mother of invention to some degree. One of the other reenactors one time came up to one of my guys, and he was wearing his equipment, okay, not regulation to how a German soldier was told he would wear equipment. But, you know, you realized if you wore it that way, you would run, and the gas mask kind of just flopping around, okay? And then you started looking at the photographs and saw, okay, that was the regulation, but the practical aspect of it showed that there was a different way to wear it, okay? Because you wanted to be as comfortable as you can and as uninhibited if you're running or if you have to,
dodge the bullets,
dodge
whatever.
the bullet,
Right.
okay? And what we try to do when we do our impression is we try to do it exactly the way they did it. And so we study film and photographs. The way the Germans carried their rifles was different than the way the Americans. The way they even held their cigarettes was different. You know, so we try to pick up on these nuances when we portray, the German soldier.
And so you mentioned the necessity being the mother of invention. So I would assume that you experienced during these reenactments some of the things that the soldiers would have found. Where
Yes.
What's the adage that the first casualty of the war is the truth, but the planning. Right. You plan
exactly,
but then you have to throw the plan away because it changes as soon as you meet the enemy.
Yes.
Right. So do you
once
find
the
that
first shot is fired, the plan goes out the window.
The plan is gone.
Yes.
So do you find that in the reenactment, that you plan the reenactment, but it
yes.
changes as it
yes.
goes forward?
One of the things that I do for the World War II Historical Reenacting Society is I am the event development coordinator, and we have several public events. One is in Lockport, Illinois. Another one is in Rockford, Illinois, and the event in Rockford has about 1,000 reenactors at it. It has tanks, pyrotechnics. So we try to choreograph, because we have troops on the field with a 30-ton tank, so for safety
you don't want anyone
purposes,
to get hurt, right?
But if the minute that first shot is fired, it takes a life of its own. It's just amazing, and it shows you how important communication was in that day.
Now, in your reenactments, do you you talk about being choreographed? Do you know what the outcome is going to be?
Yes, we generally try to follow a scenario. Usually the Germans got to lose, okay? Just to be politically correct, okay? But, so we try to choreograph some general action on the field, to try to give the spectator as realistic a portrayal as we can give them, given the constraints of what we have to work with.
And where do you find areas that are big enough to do these things?
We mostly do it with park districts, okay? They're mostly at park district sites. We do 3 types of events. We do school presentations, static events like this. Right. We do public battle reenactments, and then we actually do tactical or war games, which are closed to the public and are for the reenactors, using all the equipment. And we usually do those at military bases.
Oh, and the military gives you the permission to come in and do that?
Yes, we have one where we're doing an Eastern Front, Germans against the Russians, the last weekend here in February at the Marseilles National Guard Training Center. Okay, so we go out and actually use the military facilities.
Which is much larger, and
yes.
They don't mind the tanks tearing up the territory,
right?
Right,
they're used to that.
Yeah,
yes. Yeah.
I was going to think in the park district that might be a problem with using the tank.
We've been pretty fortunate. The park districts have really kind of embraced this, because people don't get to see this equipment. They see movies, but they don't get the same sense. Okay, you can feel the tanks, you can feel the vibration when they go around the land. You can see the dirt coming off the tank treads. So it's stuff that's not people can't experience in a static museum, and I think that today's museum goer is changing from when I went to the museum. Things have to be much more interactive for the youth of today's society.
Well, we live in the internet age where you can get anything on video on your phone.
Right.
So I can, and I think that there is real value. I mean, I see the value because even more than video, you get the sights and the sounds, but you get the smells and you get the overall feel. You feel the air, you get the noise, and the real noise. Not filtered through your phone.
Right.
You hear what it really sounded like,
Exactly.
and it might be deafening in some cases.
When we have the airplanes, few people see an airplane coming over 75 feet in the air at 200 miles an hour, or feel the concussion of the explosions. Okay.
Now, how do you do that? I mean, you have actual explosions on the.
Oh, yes, yes. We do it with pyrotechnics. The event in Lockport Park District has got. We have a pyrotechnician that worked for the movie industry. It's choreographed with the aircraft, so they have squibs on the ground making the machine gun bullets, marking into the ground, and explosions from the simulated bomb drops and everything. It's like being on a movie set.
I think I have to come out and see this.
Yeah.
It sounds really interesting.
It's actually the second weekend in September.
Second weekend in September in Lockport.
In Lockport at a place called Delwood Park in Lockport Township Park District. And the Rockford event is held the last weekend in September at Midway Village Museum in Rockford.
So how many spectators do you normally get at something like this?
The Rockford event gets about 15,000 spectators, and the Lockport event, I'd say, has got about 8,000.
Wow, that's crowded. I mean, can you get a good view, or do you have to get there early?
They are actually pretty good. I went to an event in Ohio last year that had 40,000 spectators. It was a D-Day simulation.
Yeah.
Yep.
So when you go to schools, what's the most common question you get from the kids?
Is the uniform hot?
Oh, yeah. I imagine the answer is yes.
Yes. I find it amazing that in some ways it's kind of scary, is what's teaching the children, or at least the young boys today, is the video games. A kid will come up to us who's 14 years old, and he'll see some reenactor holding a Russian submachine gun, and they'll say that's a Russian PPS-43 that's got a rate of fire of 50 rounds per minute, and they're learning this from the video games. And it's kind of interesting that video games start teaching our children history.
I think that's fascinating. Actually, I've often wondered what the real value of video games
is. Yeah, I'm not sure that's the right, value.
But actually, it is good to see that even the video games are trying to be historically accurate, so kids do get a sense of what it was. But even there, once again, coming back to the difference between simply a video game might be on your phone, and the idea of seeing it right in front of you and having the entire environment there, and hearing the real sound at the real volume level that it took place at. And actually, with the concussion, you can feel the concussion.
That's absolutely right.
So I would imagine this is a very different experience.
And one of the things that we can still do for at least a short period of time is to talk to the veterans. Okay, they're dying off at a rate of about 1,000 a day now, because these guys are in their late 80s, early 90s. One of the things that I found out is interesting is that there's a lot of German veterans that have immigrated to the United States. So you can actually talk to them, and their stories are very fascinating.
Well, with that, believe it or not, we're out of time already.
Okay.
So, Rich, I want to thank you so much. This has been fascinating.
Sure.
And I think I need to come out and see these reenactments.
Yes, I think you'd enjoyed it.
So thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
You bet.
And thank you for joining us once again on Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. You can find us every Saturday night at 8 on Comcast Channel 19, and you can find us on the web at publicperspective.tv. So until next time, thank you and good night.